Are you having a hard time figuring out what to get Dad for Father's Day? Shop now at sportshistorynetwork.com/row1 and save 15% off your order when you check out Row 1 Brand's Vintage Sports Pictorium Gallery. They have America's best sports art. With over 7,200 historic sports prints, you're assured to find something unique for Dad this Father's Day. If he's an NFL buff, check out the 1963 vintage NFL helmet poster. Shop now at sportshistorynetwork.com/row1.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello, old sports, and welcome to the Hello, Old Sports podcast on the Sports History Network. I'm Dan Neumann, and along with my co-host Andrew Neumann, we'd like to once again thank you for listening to our show. This week, the NFC Mount Rushmore of quarterbacks. Last week, we named the best four quarterbacks for each team in the AFC. This week, it is the NFC's turn. Before we start, I'd just like to remind you to please subscribe, rate, comment, do anything you can to engage with the show. Find us on Facebook at Hello Old Sports Podcast or email us at hellooldsports@gmail.com. I'd also like to remind you that very soon we hope to have our Super Bowl trivia episode. So if you're out there and you'd like to participate, please email us at hellooldsports@gmail.com or comment on our Facebook page, and we will set you up as one of our contestants for our Super Bowl trivia extravaganza. Andrew, how are you today?
I am doing well. I guess we should probably put out a call on that Facebook page for anyone who wants to participate in Super Bowl trivia.
Yes, we will do that.
I will write that down. Tonight is definitely going to be interesting. Last week's episode, I mean, there's obviously some newer teams in the NFC as well, but in the AFC, you had really nobody who's been around before 1960, with a couple of exceptions, and the Steelers really didn't have any history to speak of fondly prior to 1960. So you were really only talking about two teams that go back to prior to the AFL, in the Browns and the Colts, who obviously won our AFC bracket as having the strongest quarterbacks, which probably isn't a coincidence. Meanwhile, in the NFC, just off the top of your head, you got teams like the Giants, Philadelphia, Washington, Green Bay, Chicago, Detroit,
Dallas.
Yeah, well, I'm saying teams that started prior to the 60s. I'm saying just teams, and the Cardinals, who, the reason I said Chicago, going back, you have, at least half the teams that go back to the 50s, if not earlier. In some cases, like the Giants or the Packers or the Bears, they go back to the 20s. So there's a lot more to choose from, which makes it easier in some ways, but can also make it harder in certain cases, because as different as football was in 1963, for example, or 1973 or 1983, it's still somewhat comparable. You can look at stats and kind of go, all right, I can adjust these up a little bit because of the era. You really, if you're talking about a quarterback from the 40s or the 30s, you really can't even look at the stats, because the career numbers a good quarterback would have put up in the 30s or 40s is bettered in a year these years. You know what I mean? So it was almost like looking into it was almost comparing different sports in certain cases.
I think you can look at it comparatively to the other guys that were in the league at that time.
That's what you have to do, yeah.
So I think just a few sort of reminders, and for those of you who may not have listened to the first episode in the series, what we do is we go through the entire history of the team. We pick four quarterbacks to represent the Mount Rushmore of each team. We leave the criteria sort of open-ended so that we can choose whether it's based on stats or winning or just importance of the franchise, big moments. We kind of leave that open-ended, purposely leave that open-ended. And then after we've done each division, we choose a winner in the division. And once we've done the entire conference, we choose a winner for the entire conference. And as Andrew alluded to, last week's winner was the Colts franchise of both Baltimore and Indianapolis. And now 4 quarterbacks represented there were Johnny Unitas, Peyton Manning, Andrew Luck, and Burt Jones. So a couple of Hall of Famers. I guess Manning's not a Hall of Famer yet, but he will be. Some MVPs, a couple of Super Bowl winners. So that is whoever wins the NFC will be going against the Indianapolis-Baltimore Colts in the final matchup. And the way we worked it last week, and I think we should probably work it again this way this time around, is we start with a team, and Andrew will tell me who he thinks his sort of no-brainers are, and then assuming that I agree, which I always have, we then sort of go into the next few that maybe there's a little bit more debate on. Does that work for you?
Yep, I think that was good. We didn't really have any. At best, we had disagreements over whether somebody was a no-brainer or not, but nobody I listed as a no-brainer or that you listed as a no-brainer wasn't on the other person's list. So,
and I don't know about your list, and maybe this will come up. I went pretty far back, but I didn't go so far back to where it was even questionable whether the guy was a quarterback or not.
No.
I think 40s are probably the earliest that I have.
I only have a handful of guys who are old-ish, or that are close to that old. I'm looking through, trying to just refresh my memory here as I'm looking. No, I might have one or two as we look, but it's not too many. I mean, yeah, the post-World War, anything before World War II is kind of dicey.
And certainly not anything going back to the 20s or the 30s where a guy would be the leading passer on the team, but he would not be called a quarterback. He was considered a halfback or a tailback or whatever and would throw 20 passes in the year. I don't think we go back that far.
No, I don't think I do, but there might be one or two here. As I'm looking, I think I might have one where I did that for lack of a better, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it.
All right, so why don't we start off as we did last week in the East? And we started off last week with the Jets, so I think only to be fair, why don't we start off with the Giants this time around?
All right. Peyton Manning and Phil Simms are definitely on there, right?
No. I don't think
Eli Manning.
See, you do that to me once a show probably, so I finally got to do it to you, so I'm happy about that.
Okay, fair enough, yes. Eli Manning and Phil Simms are on the list, are on your list, I'm assuming, right?
Yes, and I had those both down as no-brainers. Manning, I think, probably will be in the Hall of Fame. Manning certainly maybe would not be in the Hall of Fame were it not for winning 2 Super Bowls, but the fact of the matter is he did win 2 Super Bowls. He won 2 Super Bowl MVPs. Simms, I think, is a borderline Hall of Famer. Next week, when we talk about Super Bowl 25, we may talk about Simms some more. But I think Simms is probably a borderline Hall of Famer. I don't think he'll ever get in, but he's probably a borderline. So both of those are definitely no-brainers. Where did you go from there?
All right. So my third one was Y.A. Tittle.
Me too.
The only knock on him is he only was there for 4 years, but he had probably the most dominant run a Giants quarterback has ever had. If you really wanted to cherry pick 4 years of Eli's, 07, 08, 09, and 11, like the 07 to 11 era for Eli, but Tittle was, he was there for 4 years. They were in the NFL championship game 3 times. He was in an era where, he's still 6th in passing yards all time for the Giants, despite only being there for 4 years and playing in 54 games. They were 32 and 13, and then 3 ties in those 4 years. 96 touchdowns he threw. Talked in our In Memoriam episode about Del Schaffner, who was his number 1 receiver for most of that time. But I don't think the only slight knock on him would be tenure. But when you talk about who the rest of the guys you're considering are, I don't think that's a strong enough argument to leave him out.
Probably the only time until the Eli days where the Giants could truly be considered a passing team. So, yeah, I have Tittle on there as well.
Okay, and then fourth, to me, it came down to a couple of guys. I actually gave Fran Tarkenton a serious look just because he was the quarterback when they were awful. And he was 33, 30, and 36 in his 5 years as the Giants quarterback. Getting 33 wins to 36 losses out of the late 60s, early 70s Giants was a miracle. And it was an early version of the West Coast offense, but I didn't end up going with him. To me, Connerly had to win out just based on longevity. He was the quarterback in 56 when they won the championship, third most games started all time. Again, much different era, but he still threw 173 touchdown passes, just under 20,000 yards total, which is good for third in the passing categories. Ultimately, although that wasn't a throw the ball all over the field era, I still thought he was just stronger than any of the other guys you could give it to.
That's Charlie Connerly, the quarterback who was the Giants quarterback in 56 when they won the title, and then again in 58 and 59 when they went to the NFL championship game 2 years in a row against the Colts, lost both years. And then he retires after the 61 season. 61 was Tittle's first year, and Connerly and Tittle sort of shared the quarterback position in 61. Connerly then retires. Interesting fact about Connerly, he was actually the original Marlboro Man. It was not uncommon. In fact, it was pretty common for professional athletes to endorse cigarettes in those days, and Connerly was the original Marlboro Man. Mascot is the wrong word. The originally advertised Marlboro Man. So great Giant. Again, hard to compare the numbers even to Tittle, but considered a star in his time, hence the endorsements. The quarterback of the championship team. Interestingly enough, before we move on, if you look at Connerly's stats, you won't see a lot of starts because the Giants in those days had a weird habit of, they had another quarterback by the name of Don Heinrich who would oftentimes actually start the game, and then Connerly would observe the first couple of series from the sideline, sort of getting an idea of what he should do when he went in. So if you look at the championship season, for instance, Connerly has 12 games, appeared in all 12 games, but 0 starts and only 6 starts in 58. So it was a different era, and he played the position in a different way, but the leader of a really dynamic offense for those Giants teams, the leader of a championship-winning team in 1956, Giants wouldn't win another championship again till 1986, 30 years later. So I would say absolutely. So we're in agreement here. Eli Manning, Phil Simms, Y.A. Tittle, and Charlie Connerly. Let's move on to the Philadelphia Eagles.
Yeah, this one's going to get interesting. What do you have for the Eagles?
So I have Norm Van Brocklin.
Okay.
I have Sonny Jurgensen. I have Donovan McNabb. And I have Randall Cunningham.
I have McNabb and Cunningham.
Really? Those are the two I thought would be more.
Cunningham. So here's the deal. McNabb is on the list. You can talk me out of either Jaworski or Cunningham. I didn't put either of the older guys on there.
Wow.
I did this a couple of weeks ago, so now I'm trying to find my reason. And it wasn't just, they're like the numbers were older. I feel like I had reasons why neither of them really made the list, but you can talk me into one of them. I'm going to stand pretty firmly on my last spot. But so I think you had Jurgensen and Van Brocklin, right?
Yeah, and Cunningham and McNabb.
Van Brocklin's on the team for 3 years.
Okay.
And Jurgensen's on the team for 7 years, below 500. I mean, his numbers are a lot better than Van Brocklin's were while Van Brocklin was the quarterback.
It's funny, in 1960, which up until a couple of years ago was the last world championship for the Eagles franchise, the two quarterbacks were Van Brocklin and Jurgensen. Van Brocklin in his last year was the starter, and then Jurgensen, I don't know if Jurgensen was actually a rookie that year. It was definitely early on in his career. Two guys who would both go to the Hall of Fame, but Van Brocklin's best years were earlier on with the Rams, and Jurgensen's best years were later on with the Redskins. So, yeah, maybe I was blinded a little bit by the fact that they won a championship. You had Ron Jaworski as one of yours.
I mean, he's second all time in passing yards. He was, started the most games in franchise history. Well, McNabb got 6 more starts than him in franchise history. Did take him to a Super Bowl. He's second all time in touchdowns. Let's get to the crux of the matter. Nick Foles goes on this list.
Really?
Nick Foles. Okay, what's the most important moment in Philadelphia Eagles franchise history?
Well, I mean,
no. How important was football in 1960 compared to how important was football in 2017?
In Philadelphia?
Anywhere.
Yeah. All right. That's fair.
Nick Foles goes on the list, and it's Nick Foles takes over for Carson Wentz, leads this team. And look, this is disgraceful that he did this. You could argue with me that it's objectively bad for humanity. I'll agree with you on that the Eagles won a Super Bowl. But Nick Foles to me is on the if you're talking about Mount Rushmore, because if we're just going to go, okay, who's the top 4 in passing yards? Okay, fine. But if your argument for why Norm Van Brocklin goes on the list is because he was the quarterback for a team that won a championship, my argument is going to be that Nick Foles comes in as a backup. I mean, he also, by the way, was there before and had some good. Nick Foles played more games as an Eagle starting quarterback than Norm Van Brocklin did, I'm sure.
Well, only 36 for Van Brocklin.
Yeah, Nick Foles played 40 games with the Eagles. He's 21-11-0 as a starter. Van Brocklin's 19-16-1. He, by the way, won another playoff game the next year too, but that's neither here nor there. He was the quarterback. I mean, yeah, the most famous play, and he was also, by the way, involved in the most famous play in Eagles history. Now, he caught the ball, but he was still a quarterback.
So I'm assuming that the fact that the Eagles hadn't won so long is a part of this argument here, because you could make the same argument for Jeff Hostetler. You could make the same argument for Doug Williams, guys who were not really full-time starters. So I'm guessing
you can absolutely make the argument for Hostetler. The question is, if you went back to the Giants, who would you put Hostetler in instead of?
Yeah. All right.
Nick Foles goes again. I think you're exhibiting a little too much of, it was 60 years ago, so it was more important because less people remember it.
No.
You know what I mean? I think you're overcorrecting here.
I think the fact that he's in the Hall of Fame makes a difference too. All right.
Not with the Eagles.
All right. No, you're right. You're right. Okay, it's fine. So we're taking McNabb.
Yes.
We'll take Foles.
All right. The rest of them you can have. You can just I'm not going to die on the hill of Ron Jaworski.
I'm actually inclined. Let me just look at Jurgensen's numbers here with the Eagles.
And the fact of the matter is, we're going to have to talk about Sonny Jurgensen again in a minute, too.
Yeah, Jurgensen, he didn't do a whole. He was really only the Eagles starter for 2+ years. All right, so here's what I'm going to propose. We got Foles. We got McNabb. I'm going to go Van Brocklin over Jurgensen because Van Brocklin was either an All-Pro or a Pro Bowler all 3 years that he was in Philly, and he led them to a world championship. And I want to say, did he maybe win an MVP award or something in that 1960 season? No, that's not right. Paul Horning won it in 1960. But no, I'm sorry. Yeah, 1960, his last year, Van Brocklin, he was the NFL and he was the NFL MVP. Yeah, it was Horning was in 61. Yeah, so I'm going to take Van Brocklin, and then, I think I'm going to, I don't know, I'm kind of torn between Jaworski, Cunningham, and Jurgensen. I almost think it's got to be Jurgensen. More times leading the league, more All-Pro selections. Jaworski didn't really do much great shakes, and then Randall Cunningham was the guy played forever, and he was a revolutionary quarterback. But yeah, you know what? I don't know, Cunningham or Jurgensen?
Cunningham was a revelation. But again, and I mentioned this with Andrew Luck the other day. Does the average Eagle fan have more positive memories about Randall Cunningham, or is so much of it about if only with Randall Cunningham?
All right. Yeah.
No, that's not an answer. That's just me thinking about it. We should probably make a decision because at some point it becomes pretentious to think about this for this long. to be honest, you know what? On tenterhooks about this.
Let's go with Jurgensen.
So Jurgensen, Van Brocklin, McNabb, and Foles.
Yeah, Nick Foles, Donovan McNabb, Sonny Jurgensen, and Norm Van Brocklin. Let's keep traveling south and go to Washington. Who are your no-brainers in Washington?
Sammy Baugh is a no-brainer for me.
Mm-hmm.
And Joe Theismann is a no-brainer for me.
I had both of those. Theismann, not a Hall of Famer, but in his day was a really good quarterback for Washington, won an MVP award, won a Super Bowl, took him to another Super Bowl. I had both of those as well.
Yeah. Let me do this. Redskins passing leaders. There we go. Yeah, so they're where the heck? Every other team it pulled up a lot easier. Now I got to do this. More team info. Career leaders, passing. There we go. Yeah, Theismann is the all-time leader in yards by just by a couple thousand. Won them that Super Bowl, was the quarterback for the next team, which a lot of people say is the best team that they had in that era in '83 that lost to the Raiders. Tied for actually the most starts all-time with Sammy Baugh. 160 touchdowns, which is third all-time in passing for the Redskins, is really associated with the Redskins of that era, even though they won 3 Super Bowls with 3 different quarterbacks and had a fourth one in there in Jay Schrader at some point. People kind of consider that like the Theismann era, you know what I mean? So to me, he definitely goes on there. Theismann, Baugh, and I have Jurgensen on there for Washington as well.
Me too. Yeah, his best years were definitely with Washington. I think he was, a very atypical quarterback. He was always known for not being in the best of shape and that type of thing. And it's weird. I think he was hurt the year that they went to the Super Bowl and lost to the Dolphins. He didn't get to start in that Super Bowl. Billy Kilmer got to start in that game, and he only seems to have started 4 games in that Super Bowl. So I think he was either hurt or had been sort of relegated to backup. Yeah, I mean, Jurgensen, I put him on there. He put up some really good seasons, led the league in yards passing with the Redskins 1, 2, 3 times, led the league in completions 1, 2, 3 times. So maybe not a dominant quarterback, but given that I think he's the only other Washington quarterback who's in the Hall of Fame, and he did have some good years in the 60s, he gets number 3. Where did you go for number 4?
So I went with Billy Kilmer. To me, you could talk me into Mark Rippon if you wanted. I think I'm giving Rippon's numbers a second look here and realizing they were better than I probably gave him credit for. But I'll stick with Kilmer. He was there a little bit longer, won more games. Yeah, they lost that Super Bowl, but it can't just be about that. Numbers are comparable to Rippon's in a much different era in the 70s as opposed to the late 80s, early 90s. To me, I'll stick with Kilmer. Who did you have 4th?
I had Rippon.
You had Rippon? Yeah,
I think that Super Bowl MVP kind of pushes him over the edge.
All right. Kilmer was 4th for me, and, Rippon's numbers are a little better than I thought because I know he was always kind of – they never seemed entirely thrilled with him there, but certainly – won them a Super Bowl. Most of the years he was there, they were, pretty good. Wasn't healthy all that long, which probably didn't help. But that 91 was actually one of only 2 years he started all 16 games. But it's a close one. I'm fine with going with Rippon.
So for Washington, we have Mark Rippon, Joe Theismann, Sonny Jurgensen, and Sammy Baugh.
Now, real quick before we move on, because I'm gonna make this point in the opposite direction when we get to the next team. This would be I don't know anything about Sammy Baugh or Mark Rippon's capabilities, but the other two, that's a rough broadcast to listen to. Theismann and Sonny Jurgensen.
Well, all those years when I was first living here, it was still this way. I think they had a play-by-play guy too, but the two of the three guys in the broadcast booth for the Skins were him and Jurgensen and Sam Huff, and it was just like
as recently as 4 or 5 years ago. I remember because I was driving home from a bachelor party down about an hour south of DC, maybe 4. It was actually the week after you got married. And I was coming home, and the Giants didn't play till Monday night. And I was driving home, and I was listening to the Redskins against the Browns on Sirius for most of it. And there was 30 guys that they would occasionally go to. That was when Jurgensen was still there, and he would just pipe in every now and then and just be like, hey, pick up this third down. And I was like, all right. And then
it's halftime, Sonny.
It was like 6 different booths. They'd be like, all right, now we're going to go to Chris Cooley over here, and then we're going to go to this guy over here. And then Theismann all those years on the Sunday night booth was not a great broadcaster either. We're not here to denigrate anybody, but I thought we might talk about Dallas first and talk about how a lot of those guys are pretty legendary or famous broadcasters, and then I could compare it to Washington, but we did it in reverse order, so I had to make the joke backwards, but the point still stands.
Who you got for Dallas?
To me, there's 3 no-brainers here. Staubach, Aikman, and Romo are no-brainers.
Agreed. Aikman and Staubach, multiple Super Bowls and in the Hall of Fame. Romo doesn't have either one of those things, but yeah, Romo was... If he was not a great quarterback, he was a very, very good quarterback. Put up some crazy numbers. Played for a long time. Yeah,
and I think he had at least 1 or 2 years where he had a case as the MVP. He's their leading. He leads in yards for them. He's got nearly 100 more touchdowns than Aikman. He's got 95 more than Staubach. He's up there in terms of total starts. And by the way, he retired a lot earlier. He's still only. I mean, how old is he even now? This doesn't have his birth date on here, but he could still be playing now. But anyway, yeah, to me,
he's 40 now, so for him to still be playing would be pushing it a little bit. He's been out of the league this is his 4th year out of the league, and really in 16 he only played in 1 game, so I don't necessarily. And the year before,
hurt the whole year.
And he was hurt the whole year before. I don't know.
I'll ponder that as I watch the Bucks and the Saints play in the playoffs this weekend with total combined age 87 of the 2 quarterbacks. But yeah,
I think that was how old Jurgensen was when they finally took him out of the broadcast booth.
I mean, it would be pushing it for him to still be playing, but he theoretically could still be playing. So to me, then the 4th one comes down to a choice between Danny White and Don Meredith. Dak Prescott's not quite there yet, in my opinion. He probably will be in a couple of years. I went with Meredith just because I feel like, and maybe it's not fair, but I feel like the Cowboys were a little bit, and it kind of goes back again to the fans thing. The era Danny White was the quarterback is probably more associated with disappointment for the Cowboys, whereas that era that Meredith was the quarterback. And I know you can point to plenty of disappointments in that era as well, but sort of the dawn of the Cowboys and, these sort of original myth making of the Cowboys was during that era. So again, it's not one I totally feel strongly about. White's numbers are probably better, but then you have to talk eras. That 20 years is a big difference there. So
I agree. I think Meredith was the team leader in a way that maybe White wasn't. Like you said, those Cowboys of the 80s were not great. Meredith led his team to 2 NFL title games against the Packers in 66 and 67, both of which they lost basically on the last play of the game. Career cut short. He retired at 30 because of injuries. So you're right. Both important figures and it really is sort of funny to think about how with only a few years off in between, the Cowboys all these years have gone from Meredith to Staubach to White to Aikman. And then there was a few years between Aikman and Romo, but the story of the Dallas Cowboys quarterbacks. I just named 5 guys, and we got to push one off. So I'm comfortable, like you are, with having Danny White be that guy. So our Dallas – go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's sort of just like one guy who was sort of synonymous with the beginning and the rise of the Cowboys that then lasted all the way for another 20 years. And then White was there as it started to go down. Not that it's his fault, but that's,
he is associated with that.
And that just to by the way, underscore my point, Don Meredith, or what I was saying about with Washington before, Don Meredith, one of the original Monday Night Football announcers for all those years. Tony Romo, now the lead guy at CBS and probably will be for a very long time. And Troy Aikman, the lead guy at Fox for 20 years now. I don't know if Roger Staubach had much of a broadcasting career to speak of, but
you'd think he would too, because he was sort of such a clean-cut Navy guy and always very polished. And I just want to look up here and see, did he do anything after he, I don't know if I'll be able to find it with any sort of ease. I don't see any. Oh, here we go. During the early 1980s, Staubach worked for a brief time as color commentator for CBS Sports NFL telecasts. So he did it for a short period of time. So he's probably the best quarterback of the 4, but most likely the least prominent broadcaster of the 4. So just to recap, our Dallas Cowboy quarterbacks, Troy Aikman, Roger Staubach, Tony Romo, and Don Meredith. Who gets the Duke here? Who wins the division?
It's got to be Dallas, I feel like, right? I mean, the Giants don't have any sole Hall of Famers there. Maybe Eli gets in borderline. The Eagles guys we talked about, the 2 older guys, you can't give even the majority of their careers to the Eagles. I mean, what? Yeah, I think it's got to be Dallas, right?
I think you could make half a case for Washington, but I'm with you. It's Dallas.
All right, so Dallas goes on into the next round. So now we get into some very old football. Where do you want to start? So the next division is the North: Green Bay, Chicago, Detroit, Minnesota. Where do you want to start there?
Let's start with the newest. Let's start with Minnesota.
So let me pull this up. But what I have listed here is I have Fran Tarkenton.
And that's probably the only no-brainer.
You're probably right. Vikings passing leaders. I have Fran Tarkenton, Dante Culpepper, Tommy Kramer, and Wade Wilson.
I was with you on the first 3. Tarkenton's a no-brainer. Led the team to 3 Super Bowls. You talk about sort of revolutionary quarterbacks. Tarkenton is really sort of the first of the running quarterbacks. He is an all-time great, Tarkenton. So I think he was an MVP one year. So he is without, he won the MVP in, I believe it was sometime in the mid-70s. Let me just pull that up here. Tarkenton was MVP at 75. Like I said, 3 Super Bowls, Hall of Famer. Played with the team. He
runs with the Vikings.
That was what I was just about to say. He really had kind of a crazy career. He came up with them in 1961. Played with them through 66. Then he was on the Giants for 5 or 6 years, and then was traded back to them in 72. And then that was when he had all those crazy runs. And here was a guy, his rookie year in 61, he started 10 games. In 78, he started 16 games. So he was a starting quarterback in the NFL basically for 18 years. There were a couple years with injuries and that type of thing. So Tarkenton, a no-brainer. I was with you on Culpepper. His Viking years are obviously the best years of his career. He was kind of a journeyman later in his career, Oakland, Detroit, Miami, but he, at 99, which was his rookie year, and Randall Cunningham was actually the quarterback of the team. He was a backup. He didn't get many. So those Vikings teams, those crazy teams with Moss and Chris Carter and Jake Reed, the best of those, well, actually the best would have been 98, the year before. That was the year with Cunningham. And that was the year they were 15-1 and lost the NFC Championship game. But he took that over and had some really solid years in 2000, 2001, 2, 3, 4.
Made the Pro Bowl 3 times, 2000, 03, and 04.
So, yeah, a good NFL quarterback for a few years. Tommy Kramer, I think, maybe kind of gets there by default as the number 3. There's nothing really particularly eye-popping about the career of Tommy Kramer. One Pro Bowl. The only thing he ever really seems to have led the league in was interceptions. I don't know how many times. They made the playoffs a couple times, but didn't really do all that much. But he provided some consistency at quarterback for the team in the 80s. And if you're looking at the history of the franchise, there's really nowhere else you can go for your number 3 other than Tommy Kramer.
Yeah, and that's kind of, he's second all-time in passing, yardage, and basically, like you said, kind of by default, just because he's got 2 more interceptions than touchdowns, 2 games under 500, a very 55.1% completion percentage, like very definition of sort of middle of the road, but sort of longevity and lack of competition, in my opinion, get him there.
It's funny. We alluded to this a little bit when we talked about Chris Dolman in one of the In Memoriam episodes. The quarterback situation in the 80s and the 90s for the Vikings was very interesting because you had a few years of Wilson, and then it seemed like every year they'd find a quarterback who was pretty good for 1 year or maybe 2 years, and then they'd get rid of. So after Wilson leaves, they have Rich Gannon for a few years, a full 10 years before Rich Gannon is an MVP. He's starting for the Vikings. Then they get 1 year of Jim McMahon, make the playoffs. That was the Viking team that lost to the Giants in the first round of the playoffs.
93.
Then you get a couple years of Warren Moon. Then you get Brad Johnson for a couple years. And then 1 year of Cunningham. And I don't know the entire story, but there must have been some reason why they let Cunningham walk after he was the quarterback on a 15-1 team that put up just a crazy offense. Then you had 1 year of Jeff George, and then it was Culpepper.
Cunningham was on the team in 99.
So they benched him for Jeff George.
I guess.
Strange.
But it wasn't. Didn't they bring in Culpepper?
No, 99 was Jeff George was the leading passer. There was a year in between.
But they must have also had Culpepper on that team. Culpepper wasn't a rookie in 2000.
No, but I think he got in like one game in a mop-up role in 99. He didn't do much.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe Cunningham was hurt. Or he did get hurt a lot.
I remember not thinking he got hurt. I remember at the time thinking it was strange, but that's a story for a different time. So you went with Wade Wilson. I went with Joe Kapp.
Okay.
Joe Kapp, who spent most of his career in the Canadian League, but came to Minnesota and played for the Vikings for a few years, sort of in between the Tarkenton era. And 69 led the team to Super Bowl IV against the Chiefs, and I believe made the Pro Bowl. I thought I had seen that he was the NFL Player of the Year that year. I'm looking on his Football Reference page, and I'm not seeing that. I know in those days there were, different awards, but I went with Cap.
All right. I mean,
he really wasn't the starter for much less time than Wade Wilson was.
Wade Wilson was there for 10 years.
Was he? But he didn't start all those years. He was probably.
But all right, so Cap had 1 year.
I can give you Wilson on this one.
I'm not going to fight for Wade Wilson. Like, I can see what you're saying with Joe Cap, but like through 37 touchdowns to 37 touchdowns to 47 interceptions with the Vikings, did not complete 50% of his passes. He was there for 3 years.
I'll give you Wilson.
Yeah, I mean, this would be the last time we talk about it. I don't think they're going to win this category.
So the Vikings, Fran Tarkenton, Dante Culpepper, Tommy Kramer, and Wade Wilson. Let's go Detroit. Who are your no-brainers?
Matt Stafford is a no-brainer. And
he is. He probably will not be a Hall of Famer. He's not a Hall of Famer, but he put up some really good numbers for the Lions, connecting with Megatron all those years.
And Bobby Lane.
Yeah, Bobby Lane is definitely a Hall of Famer. Led the team to the last NFL championship that they had in 1957. A very interesting guy, a guy who was a big drinker and a smoker and sort of a hellraiser, but beloved in Detroit. And like I said, was the quarterback of 3 championship teams in 52, 53, and 57.
By the way, he is the only Lions quarterback with a significant number of starts who is above 500. Even Stafford is 16 under. You got to go to find a guy above 500. You got to go all the way down to Bill Munson, who went 24, 21, and 3 in the late 60s and early 70s. And then, you can't just base it on team success with the Lions because you're done after Bobby Lane, basically.
Started his career with the Bears, and then in 1949 played for the New York Bulldogs, which I believe was a team was that an AAFC team, the New York? No, that was an NFL team in the New York Bulldogs in 1949, played at the Polo Grounds. 110-1 was their record. Anyway, so Bobby Lane, Matt Stafford, where'd we go next?
I have Greg Landry and Scott Mitchell.
That's who I had.
I basically just took the 2 guys who were next in line statistically. Mitchell was there. I remember Mitchell basically getting the Lions starting job because he had one real good game with the Dolphins filling in for Dan Marino. That's kind of, you know what, I'm going to pull that exact game up because I remember Marino got hurt and Mitchell was good and got a job with Detroit and was always more – I always remember him being criticized as stinking, but did have a couple of playoff appearances for them. The last playoff appearances they had for a very long time. 12,000 yards, 79 touchdowns to 57 interceptions. I think his numbers are a little better than I thought they would be. I mean, look, don't get me wrong. It's nothing to be proud of that he's their 3rd best quarterback of all time. But yeah, I mean, you get to Joey Harrington on this list pretty quick. When you look at Lions quarterbacks through history, That's how bad it is.
Greg Landry was a quarterback for them in the early 70s. Did not do anything too noteworthy. Made 1 Pro Bowl in 71. Made the playoffs once in 70, although even that year he was not the lone starting quarterback. He sort of split it with another guy. The thing I remember most about Scott Mitchell, beyond the fact that you're right, I almost remember him more as Marino's backup. Do you remember when we first started playing fantasy football in the mid 90s?
Yeah.
So there was a thing where, and I guess I can say this word.
The broadside of a barn?
Well, no, they used to.
That was in the magazine.
But in the magazine also, they used to say, Scott is a lemon ass. but he plays on a team that throws the ball all the time, which is funny to think about because he was playing with Barry Sanders. So maybe who knows? But they used to say that he was not a good quarterback. He was not a winning quarterback, but just by virtue of how many times he would throw the ball, he would just put up good fantasy numbers. But yeah, it gets given how long this franchise has been around. They first came into the league in 1930 as the Portsmouth Spartans, and you've really got 1 Hall of Famer, 1 decent guy, and then 2 guys who just really don't belong at all. So for the Lions, we're going to go with Bobby Lane, Matt Stafford, Scott Mitchell, and Greg Landry.
All right. I'm going to say let's go to the Packers next because the Packers one, you're really discussing one position where the Bears one we might get a little more into the Bears one.
Yep. I'm thinking 3 no-brainers for the Packers.
Rodgers, Favre, Starr.
Bart Starr, Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers. All won MVPs, all won Super Bowls, and all will one day be in the Hall of Fame. All right. I'm thinking we're probably going to disagree on the 4th here, but why don't you tell me who you had?
I was being purposely provocative here. I think your disclaimer at the beginning that this guy shouldn't count as a quarterback is probably accurate. But I took Arnie Herber from the 30s. I mean, he did pass the ball a lot. Like, he threw the ball 100 times a year, a couple of times here. It wasn't like he was 3 for 8, but he's also officially listed as a tailback most of the time.
I shall simply note that I also had Arnie Herber.
Okay. Well, so
Hall of Famer.
Yeah. He's
threw to Don Hutson in the early years, or in the early years of Hutson's career, in the later years of his career.
And the numbers, again, it's the 30s. The thing that jumps out at you is how awful the completion percentage is, 30 to 40% completion percentage. But, was the quarterback on a couple of championship teams in the 30s.
4 championships.
4 championships. In 1936, he was 77 of 173 for 1,200 yards and 11 touchdowns. Most years, around 10 touchdowns. Like, again, it was the 30s. So you can't compare it to even 20 years later. But if there's going to be a team where you're going to throw a guy this old on there, I could have gone with like Lynn Dickey or something like that. But I figured, why not take a nod to one of the earliest dynasties and put Herber on the list there? Because then you're going to have guys who did a ton of winning if you have those 4 on there.
The other thing I think is interesting, and I don't know, this is probably the first we've had where all 4 guys are Hall of Famers, and it's definitely the first we've had where
Hall of Famer.
Well, he will be. I mean, I think we can safely say Aaron Rodgers is going to be in the Hall of Fame.
Either way, Aaron Rodgers is at the top of this list.
Yeah, I think Rodgers is a better quarterback than Favre. I was rooting years ago, and I continue to root this year for Rodgers to win another Super Bowl so that he has more than Favre. No question about it. Yeah, no, I definitely think Rodgers is first, but all 4 guys, Hall of Famers, if you assume Rodgers is going to be there, and did it basically, obviously Favre left at the end, but did basically their whole career in Green Bay and put up that Hall of Fame resume in Green Bay. So I think we are definitely in agreement in chronological order. Arnie Herber, Bart Starr, Brett Favre, and Aaron Rodgers. That might be the strongest one we've seen so far. Let's go to Chicago. I only had one no-brainer.
Is that Sid Luckman?
Sid Luckman, 40s, great quarterback. Father was actually a gangster who worked for Murder Inc. in New York City. The
rap group Murder Inc.?
No, the Meyer Lansky gangsters in the 30s and 40s. So Luckman's got a really interesting story, but he's a great, great player, great quarterback. So he definitely makes it in, no question. After that, it gets a little slow.
We have to talk. It's insane how bad their quarterback history is for a successful franchise that's been around 100 years. Fifth leading passer is of all time already is Mitchell Trubisky. Now, again, I know different eras, but so Cutler is on the list to me. He was there for a long time. He's by 10,000 yards their leading passer. I know he's, was always a polarizing guy, but he threw 154 touchdowns. He was, again, a team with no sort of passing game to speak of before he was there. To me, Cutler is on there. I have Jim McMahon on there. McMahon is you can justify McMahon with the numbers, but even if you couldn't, being the quarterback of that 85 team, I think that alone would probably put him on there, especially. And
he was a character and he was a team leader in his own way.
Yeah, and the numbers justify it too. So Cutler, Harbaugh, and Luckman not Harbaugh. Cutler, Luckman, and McMahon to me would definitely be the 3 that I don't think there's much debate about. And then I put Billy Wade on as the 4th one.
I did too.
Just because he was, the other candidates would be Jim Harbaugh, probably. Wade had was the quarterback of that team that won the championship in 63. He was a Pro Bowler in 63. Was their primary starter really for about a 5-year period. Had a couple of really nice, threw for 3,000 yards in 62, which was, in 1962, that's a lot. 22 touchdowns in 61, 18 in 62. If you're going to put McMahon there for winning a championship, I think you can make the same argument with Wade.
Yeah, I like Wade. I looked a couple other places. George Blanda was there for a couple years, but it was not his best time by any means. I looked really far back, very briefly, at Johnny Lujack, who was Luckman's successor. Was only on the team for 4 years. Was only in the NFL for 4 years, but 2-time Pro Bowler, 1-time All-Pro. Lujack was a Notre Dame, and I believe he played a role in Notre Dame Army game, one of those.
I knew that name from somewhere.
Yeah.
And second, I was like, did he become a wrestler or something? Like, why do I know that name beyond just that? But yeah, you're right. I think he was involved with the he also won the Heisman in 47, so he was the one right after Mr. Inside and Mr. Outside.
If you want to hear more about the history of Army football, check out our 2 episodes, one on the history of Army football and one on the history of the Army-Navy game in the archives.
But yeah, that must be why I knew the name. They wanted him to go to West Point, asked for an appointment, but he was a fan of Notre Dame from listening to their broadcasts, so he played at South Bend. Okay, that makes sense. Did he maybe? He was an assistant for a couple of years at Notre Dame. He was also a TV color commentator, and he did a lot of Giants games in the late 50s and early 60s.
So I am with you, Billy Wade, Jim McMahon, Jay Cutler, and Sid Luckman. I don't know how much discussion we need here, but who wins the division?
Well, considering that one team has 4 Hall of Famers, but, Rodgers and Favre and Starr, it's the Packers in a fairly... I mean, if you took the 4 best quarterbacks from the other 3 teams, I don't think they would touch the Packers.
That would be Luckman, Lane, Tarkenton, and
exactly.
Probably Stafford. But yeah, no, that'd be closer. But yeah, no, you agreed. So we got Green Bay, we got Dallas. Do we want to go south or west next?
Let's go south. And the reason I like the comparison is, NFC East, 3 teams who've been around forever, and then the Cowboys who've been around since the 60s. They're since 60. NFC North, 3 teams that have been around forever, and then Minnesota, who's been around since 1960. And now you got 4 newer teams. The oldest team on this list is Atlanta and New Orleans, and neither of them had much history to speak of for a very long time. So this is a lot newer. So I like this sort of contrast here. So let's go with South.
Let's start with New Orleans, because I think when you want to talk about drop-offs, this is another example of that. Breeze is a no-brainer, obviously.
Is a no-brainer. And Archie Manning is a no-brainer.
Archie Manning is definitely a no-brainer. I think for obvious reasons, the actual career of Archie Manning gets lost in the fact that he's the father of Peyton and Eli Manning. In a way, it's kind of similar to like a Ken Griffey Sr. or a Bobby Bonds, where they're better known for being the father of sons who eclipse them. But Manning was beloved in New Orleans. His career definitely cut short by injuries, and I don't think he ever made the playoffs, never led a team to the playoffs, I don't believe so.
Oh, no.
Those Saints teams were horrible.
So here's his record as a starter, because I don't want to pull up the whole franchise index, but
I'm looking at this now. Oh my God.
The years he was with the Saints, which they'd been in the league about 4 years when he came in 71, 3-5-2, 2-11-1, 5-8, 3-8, 2-11-1, missed the whole 76 season with an injury.
I bet he was just using that as an excuse.
1-8, 7-9, and then 8-8 in his last year, 8-8, then 1-15, and then 3-8 before he finally got out of there in 82 and went to Houston and a few other teams. But he is a Hall of Famer. His career record with the Saints is 35, 91, and 3.
Well, he's not in the Hall of Fame.
Not a Hall of Famer?
No, he's not in the Hall of Fame.
I thought he was. Oh, wow. I see. I thought he was. I had thought he was. Always thought he was a Hall of Famer.
Nah, he falls short of that, and justifiably so. He doesn't belong in the Hall of Fame. Okay, so just a few quick numbers here. 35, 91, and 3 with New Orleans. 35, 101, and 3 for his career. He lost. This is perhaps the most interesting stat to me. He lost the last 18 starts of his NFL career. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing is like how bad he was, and nobody ever talks about, like nobody ever tries to blame him for it. Like they all kind of acknowledge that, yeah, he did the best he could with absolutely horrendous teams. Like, and the thing with in football too is like you get the crap kicked out of you if you're on a bad team like that, which he did.
Where do we go next?
Well, we didn't finish New Orleans.
No, I mean, where do we go next with quarterbacks for New Orleans?
Aaron Brooks is on my list. Is he on your list?
He is. He was the quarterback for a brief period of time from 01 to like 05, basically immediately prior to Breeze.
And then I went with Bobby Hebert.
That was where I went to.
So hard. Hebert, those are 3 and 4 in the all-time passing leaders. Brooks had a few good years with the Saints. Hebert was actually there when they were, probably had their best stretch prior to, the Drew Brees era. And then if you look beyond those guys, it's all guys who were there a couple of years. So it's not guys who were there very long. So again, Wade Wilson's back on this list now too. He's way down, but yeah, I think those sort of by default have to be the guys. Hebert actually had a really good record with them, and but
those were the teams in the late 80s and early 90s that were best known for just having so many good linebackers, not legends, but Ricky Jackson, Sam Mills, Pat Swilling. They'd have 2 and 3 Pro Bowl linebackers for like 4 and 5 years in a row.
Yeah, they were in that NFC West where every team played in the Southeast, basically.
Yeah, New Orleans, Atlanta, Tampa. No, Tampa was in the Central.
Eventually, it got to a point where the last couple of years of that division, once the Rams moved to St. Louis, there were 5 teams in that division. It was Carolina, New Orleans, and Atlanta, who are all in the South now, and then St. Louis, which is in Missouri. Like, the 49ers were the only team it was where they were supposed to be. If I was them, I'd have been like, what? You got to help. And I think that was one of the breaking points was finally they're like, what are you doing here? Look, where we're supposed to be. And you're making us, they have to make all these trips to the, So anyway, but yeah. So Breeze, Manning, Brooks, Hebert.
Yes. Let's go to Tampa Bay next.
All right. So right away, I have Brad Johnson. It's not a real proud history, but he won the Super Bowl with them. I have Brad Johnson, Vinny Testaverde, Trent Dilfer, and Doug Williams are my 4.
So I had Johnson, quarterback of their only ever Super Bowl winning team.
He was and defense first team, but, had a really good Super Bowl and was good enough for them that year.
I had him. I had Testaverde. Vinny Testaverde, when we talked about this a little bit last week when we talked about the Jets, Vinny Testaverde was a good quarterback. Ironically, his better years came later. His better years came when he was in his 30s after he left Tampa and got out of there and went to Baltimore and then later the Jets. If you'd asked me in 1991 when Testaverde was just kind of muddling around in Tampa, if he was going to have the type of career he ended up having all these different places, I would have thought you were crazy. But
you also would have been 9, so I don't know that you would have,
I knew my football.
Been able to speak profoundly on the subject either. But
Dilfer, yeah, he made a Pro Bowl with Tampa. He was their starting quarterback for a number of years in the late 90s, took them to the playoffs in 97.
On their way up. He was there on their way up.
You went with Doug Williams, who best known as the middle quarterback for the middle of the 3 Washington Super Bowls, also known as the first black quarterback to start and to win. He was the first to do each of those in the Super Bowl, and a solid NFL quarterback. The fact that he had such a great year as a great game in the Super Bowl speaks well to him, and generally doesn't really help him in Tampa Bay. My fourth, I had actually gone with Jameis Winston.
Here's why I couldn't. Just because he became, and I know he's their leader in a bunch of stuff, but he just had become such a source of embarrassment for them. I mean, his last couple of years, it was almost performance art how bad he was in 2019. He threw 30 interceptions in 2019. All the advanced metrics were like off the page in terms of negative for him those years. He was a really high draft pick for them, which means they were drafting him to be their franchise quarterback. You know, had 1 year where they went 9-7, never really did too much with them. Again, I won't argue the case too much for him against Doug Williams, but to me, just where they picked him and sort of that it became an embarrassment. But maybe I'm overjudging, you know, sort of the narrative aspect of it. So
can I suggest a third option?
What's that?
Can we go Brady?
I feel like if we did this in 2 weeks, maybe.
I almost feel like Brady's already done more for Tampa as a quarterback than either one of those guys, probably.
Yeah, I guess we could. You know, he's had this is how shallow it is like when I wrote this 3 weeks ago, maybe not, and now maybe.
And by the time it airs, this airs in a week, and maybe you'll have won a playoff game.
If they go into New Orleans, that's the thing. If they go into New Orleans, win, and they go to the NFC Championship game for the first time in 18 years, yeah, you probably would put him on the list. So I guess we can just go with Brady. All
right, so for those listening, if Brady this coming Sunday, after we record this, before it airs, if Brady throws 4 interceptions and the Bucs lose to New Orleans, 31-6, then maybe we'll have to do an addendum. But for now, our Tampa Bay quarterbacks are Brad Johnson, Vinny Testaverde, Trent Dilfer, and Tom Brady. Good to see Tom Brady finally get the credit he deserves from somebody.
It would be great if in the future, like after he retires, if he's known as former Buccaneer Tom Brady. All right. Atlanta or Carolina next?
Let's do Carolina, because this is another one of those expansion teams where you can't fault them because they haven't been around for as long, but you do get to a point where you're sort of scraping the bottom of the barrel, although not as much as with some other teams.
Compared to Jacksonville and Baltimore and Houston that we did last week,
this isn't so bad.
No, it's not. And it's weird because some of those franchises have had a lot more success than Carolina has, but so Cam Newton is a no-brainer in this discussion. I mean,
MVP, took him to the Super Bowl,
had a bunch of really good years, was a number 1 overall pick who lived up to the hype. I mean, obviously, if you draft the guy number 1 overall, you're looking for him to be a Hall of Famer, but still, he's the leader in every passing category on top of what he does with his legs. Had the MVP, dwarfs everybody else's numbers, including overall starts. So to me, he's definitely number 1. I went with Delhomme next, who also, is second in almost every category, started a Super Bowl for them, actually came a lot closer to winning a Super Bowl than Cam Newton did, well over 500 for his career with them, had a tendency where he could certainly throw some interceptions and things like that in big games. I think might have been in the divisional round in 2008 against Arizona. He threw like 5 interceptions on that Saturday night, but he's number 2. And then my next 2 are Steve Berline and Kerry Collins.
Those are really the only other 2 who were the starting quarterback for more than 1 year. I'm looking at Berline, who was everywhere. He was with the Raiders, and he was Aikman's backup in Dallas in their first Super Bowl year. Then he was in Phoenix, Jacksonville. He was actually on the Jacksonville team. He was Brunell's backup, but he started 6 games in 95. And that would have been their first year. Actually, that might have even been Brunell. I don't know if Brunell was in the league in 95. But anyway, then he went to Carolina, made a Pro Bowl, finished in Denver. a guy who was kind of all over the place. So, yeah, I'm with you on Berline. And then Kerry Collins, he put up some really big passing numbers in Carolina in those early years. He was there really for 3.5 years, 95, 96, 97, and then half of 98.
Yeah,
I think this was
drinking problems and things like that towards the end in Carolina.
Yeah, kind of got himself drummed out of there because of his personal demons. But, that was that Carolina team in 96 in their second year that made it all the way to the NFC Championship before losing to the Packers. Yeah, those kind of have to be our four. There'd really be nowhere else to go. Rodney Peete of Detroit Lions fame was their quarterback for 1 year. This is a guy, their quarterback in 2001 who started 15 games from them. This guy only started 20 games his whole career, but 15 of them were as a rookie for the Panthers in 2001. And I had forgotten about this guy.
Do you know who went 1-15, wasn't it? The 01 Panthers?
Yes, they did. They went
1 and then.
Do you know who I'm talking about?
2001.
Yeah, this is a guy. I haven't thought about this guy in forever.
I'm trying to look this up here.
First name is Chris.
Chris
Winkie.
Oh, I said Chris Winkie. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. He's fifth all time in their passing lead.
This guy had the craziest story. I think he'd been a baseball player or something, but he was at Florida State in like the late 90s, but he was like 28 or 29 years old.
Yeah, and then he was with Carolina in 01 and 02 and then 05 and 06. I don't know if he was there in 03 and 04 and just didn't play. He doesn't have any stats. And then was with San Francisco, but
because there was this whole controversy with him because everybody thought in his senior year in Florida State that he was maybe going to win the Heisman. And people were saying, would it really be right for a guy who's 28 years old to win the Heisman Trophy? And then I had forgotten he went to Carolina and started 15 games for a horrible team, but he still started 15 games.
He's actually the head coach at the University of Tennessee now, apparently.
I did not know that either.
He's the quarterback's coach. I didn't see the parentheses. That's
it's very different.
Yes, it is.
So the Carolina Panthers, we have Cam Newton, Kerry Collins, Jake Delhomme, and Steve Berline. That leaves us with one more team in the NFC South, and that is the Atlanta Falcons. I feel like Matt Ryan is a no-brainer.
Matt Ryan is a no-brainer, and to be honest, Michael Vick is a no-brainer.
Agreed.
If we haven't really factored in off the field stuff. I mean, I've talked about like fans view their eras and things, but I mean, Michael Vick, it's hard to overstate just how much of a force he came in sort of the era of what people call the running quarterbacks, guys like McNabb and Culpepper. He was a whole other level. That 2002 year that he had, which was his first year as a starter, his second year, first full year as a starter, his second year in the league, he threw for 3,000 yards or just under 3,000 yards. And he ran for, let me see if I can get his rushing yards that year. He also ran for another just under 800 yards. In 2006, he ran for over 1,000 yards. That was his last year with the Falcons before the unpleasantness began, where he was in, with the dog fighting and all of that, which none of this should be excusing that.
And he was a running quarterback in the way that a guy like a Newton is now, in that him running, a guy like Steve Young or even Cunningham, them running the ball was sort of a happy side benefit. They ran when they couldn't find an open receiver. Mm-hmm. Vic was one of the first guys where it was like him just taking the snap and running with the ball was a significant part of the offensive game plan.
Yeah, and got them, a couple of playoff appearances. He obviously couldn't stay healthy there, which, well, that's not fair, actually. He was healthy the whole 2003. He missed most of the season, but then 04, 05, 06, he played in 15, 15, and 16. Got them to an NFC championship game in 2004 where they got their butts kicked by the Eagles. But, yeah, I mean, to me, there's no debate that he goes on there. And then my other two were Steve Bartkowski, and I went with Chris Chandler.
I had both of those as well.
Chandler started a Super Bowl.
Made 2 Pro Bowls in the 90s. That was the late 90s Falcons teams. The most prominent name you think of when you talk about them is Jamal Anderson, who I think in 98, the year that they went to the Super Bowl, Jamal Anderson in that 98 Falcons team, he put up a crazy season.
I'll look up his numbers, but yeah, that was the Dirty Bird. Was that
1,846 rushing yards.
And they beat that Viking team we talked about before in the NFC Championship game.
So, yeah, I'm with you on Chandler, and I'm with you on Bartkowski. He's one of only 4 players from the Falcons who have their number retired. Now, he talked about how retired numbers don't tend to happen as much as they used to, but nonetheless, he was a guy who is well regarded in the history of the Atlanta Falcons. I guess the best team that he played on probably would have been 1980. They were 12-4. They lost to Dallas 30-27 in the first round of the playoffs, and Bartkowski was the leader of that team. I'm looking at some of the other offensive players on that team. Not a lot of names that really jump out at me. So I'm guessing that it's pretty safe to say that Bartkowski was a pretty strong leader of that team.
Touchdowns that year, 30 the next year, 3,500 passing yards. Actually, 81 was 30. He almost broke 4,000 in 81 passing yards. So those were definitely his 2 strongest years. He was a Pro Bowler both of those years. Started every game.
So our Atlanta Falcons, Michael Vick, Matt Ryan, Steve Bartkowski, and Chris Chandler. I have my idea about who I think wins here, but I'm curious to hear yours.
So it's either the Saints or the Falcons, in my opinion. The Saints, obviously, Breeze is the best quarterback we're talking about here. Archie Manning is a very, very good player. And then we have 2 guys who are basically just guys. Then you have Matt Ryan, who is not Drew Brees, but has had a very, very good career. Michael Vick, who was a 5 or 6 year force of nature. And then Bartkowski and Chandler, to me, are above Brooks and Hebert. But I just wonder if I just wonder if Brees and Manning are too top heavy to.
See, to me, it would only be Breeze who would be top heavy. I almost feel like you could put both Ryan and Vic over Archie Manning. Archie Manning was beloved and he was a great college player, but his professional numbers are not that great, especially his winning. I also feel like Hebert and Brooks just drag them down so much. So my vote would be for Atlanta.
All right, let's go with Atlanta. I like to pick a team that's strong 1-4 as well. So.
And since that's not possible, we'll go with a team that's at least not terrible, 3-4.
I feel like if you're going to be top heavy, your number 2's got to be better than Archie Manning. Agreed. I agree. All right, we're going to head out west now. We got 4 teams. Got some older teams here. Where do you want to start?
Let's do the 2 newer teams first, and then we'll go to the old ones. One of these teams is actually not at all. One of these teams is the oldest team in the NFL, but
have much history to speak of.
Let's start with them. Let's go with the Chicago, St. Louis, Phoenix, Arizona Cardinals.
All right. I have Kurt Warner on the list, actually at the top of the list. Kind of weird with him because he had that year with the Giants where it was like his career is basically over, and then they started him for about 9 games because he was so shell-shocked from how things ended with St. Louis. Then he goes back to Arizona and has some of the best years of his career, gets them to a Super Bowl, gets them about as close to winning a Super Bowl as you can.
Let me just jump in there. People forget how good that Super Bowl was because it came the year after the Giants-Patriots, the first Super Bowl. But that Super Bowl 43 between Pittsburgh and the Cardinals, that's a great game.
Yeah, I think there's always a little bit of sort of knowledge that the best team in the league wasn't in that game, that they had both been defeated at home by the Giants, who should have been in that game by rights. But that's me talking. I have a tough time with that game because I think the Giants were at least the Giants were better than Arizona. The Giants just got the team they couldn't beat in the playoffs, and
Philly.
We'll devote a whole month of shows to that team one year. But nothing like complaining about a team that didn't win the Super Bowl the year after a Super Bowl that really should make you happy for the rest of your life. But anyway, so Warner goes, because Warner wasn't just a 1 year thing. He was there through, he was there a couple of years before that. They got into the playoffs the next year with him. Jim Hart is on my list. He was, a starter for a long period of time with them between the 60s and all the way through to the early 80s.
Four-time Pro Bowler.
Yep, by far the leading passer for them, 12,000 more than number 2. Touchdown to interception ratio is not great. He's got 38 more interceptions than touchdowns. But again, just longevity and gross statistics, the counting numbers, to me, make him hard to leave off. And then Neil Lomax is sort of the same thing. Again, not great teams. Had the misfortune of Lomax was there from 81 to 88 in the NFC East, which at any given point in that stretch had at least 2 of the best teams in the league at any given point.
Giants in Washington.
Well, and early on you had Philadelphia and still Dallas, and later on you had the late Philly teams, or the Buddy Ryan, like the start of the Buddy Ryan teams. Like that division was a monster in the 80s. So obviously had a tough time there, but still, puts up good numbers, is second all-time in passing for them, 136 touchdowns to 90 interceptions, playing against some damn good defenses too. You always see clips of Lawrence Taylor drilling Ron Jaworski, but you see plenty of him drilling Neil Lomax too. So did you have Hart and Lomax?
I did. I am 3 for 3 with you so far.
And then number 4, I have Jake Plummer. Carson Palmer's numbers are actually pretty good as a core. Like the argument you could make for Palmer is that they won a lot more with Palmer than they did with Jake Plummer. I feel like Jake Plummer was the only thing those teams had, and he got them into the playoffs and won a playoff game against the Cowboys, which was sort of like unbelievable that the Cardinals, like that's the thing. Before that Kurt Warner Cardinals team, it was like unheard of that the Cardinals were ever even decent, and then they, like the fact that he got them, I don't know, to me, he was more important to his team than Palmer was to his team.
They made the playoffs once in 25 years, between 1982 and 2008. So 82, they were a wild card in a strike year.
That barely counts because they played 9 games that counted and 18 made the playoffs.
And they were 5-4.
Yeah. So that,
and then they made the playoffs and lost the Super Bowl in 08. Only one time in that whole interim period did they make the playoffs, and that was 98, and that was the Plummer year that you're talking about. So I am with you there. Kurt Warner, Neil Lomax, Jake Plummer, and Jim Hart. So that is Arizona.
Yeah, and we should also point out that Jimmy Hart then went on to a successful career as a professional wrestling manager.
Will you be serious?
I didn't put 2 and 2 together. Imagine Jimmy Hart playing quarterback.
He'd be good at the audibles. He'd be like, all right, guys, now we got him.
All right. So Seattle next?
Let's do Seattle next.
Russell Wilson's a no-brainer.
Absolutely.
I have Russell Wilson, Matt Hasselbeck, Dave Craig, and Jim Zorn.
Those are mine as well.
I mean, Wilson obviously there's no question. Hasselbeck, there's no question within the context of the Seahawks.
Only other guy to lead them to a Super Bowl.
Yeah, had a long stretch with them. Was a quarterback for the better part of 10 years, and really you could say the same thing with the next 2, Craig and Zorn. There was some overlap there, but their numbers are pretty similar in terms of statistics. Zorn was the quarterback right as they started, so his career record started in a hole it was tough to dig out of, just because if you're there the first couple of years when they're hideous, it's tough to dig out of that, but still managed good numbers. And really, if you talk about below that, that's what's crazy too. If you look at the 4 of them in terms of games started, The next guy down, they're all in the 126 to 144 range in terms of games started. The next guy down is Rick Meyer at 55. Him and Jeff Kemp both played in 50. Well, Jeff Kemp was a bad guy. Rick Meyer started 51 games. So there's really no question about which four it would be.
Yeah, and in almost every category. The only one, John Kitna is the only other guy who maybe did some halfway decent things, but even he, not really. And you're right. It's those four, both Krieg and Zorn, I think probably definitely benefited from throwing to Steve Largent for all those years, who was one of the best wide receivers of all time, and I believe was the all-time receiving leader prior to Jerry Rice. So definitely benefit from that. But yeah, you really don't have many other places to go with Seattle other than the four that we took, which is Russell Wilson, Matt Hasselbeck, Dave Krieg, and Jim Zorn.
Should we talk about the St. Louis LA Rams?
It would actually be the Cleveland St. Louis LA Rams, but yes, let's go for it.
Cleveland era on yours?
Yes, I do.
Okay. All right, let's go with them. What's your list?
I have Norm Van Brocklin, Bob Waterfield, Kurt Warner, and Roman Gabriel.
All right. I had Warner, Gabriel, and Van Brocklin. I'm going to allow for the fact that I probably just overlooked Waterfield.
And Waterfield was the quarterback in the Cleveland years when they, especially in 45, when they won the NFL title, and then into the glory years of the early 50s in LA.
All right. Yeah. I mean, that's fine. I think I overlooked him a little bit just because the numbers are so much lower, but obviously it's a different era.
Hall of Famer.
Yeah. There's no argument. It's got to be Waterfield. Although, let me say this. We are leaving the two leading and three of the four leading passers in terms of like yardage and touchdowns all time off of this team. Like
Jim Everett, and I'm going to request that when you edit in clips for this episode, please edit in the Jim Rome clip with Jim Everett. Just please make that work. I can do that.
Jim, good to have you on the show.
Good to be here, Jim. Thank you.
Check that. Chris Everett, good to have you on the show.
You know what? You've been calling me that for about the last 5 years.
About 2 years, actually, Chris.
Well, hey, you know what? Let me say one thing. In that game, how many sacks did I have that we came back and won?
How many sacks did you have?
How many sacks?
Well, see, but this was back in 1989.
Okay, that was
you may have even been Jim Everett back there, but somewhere along the way, Jim, you ceased being Jim and you became Chris.
Well, let me tell you a little secret. That, we're sitting here right now, and if you guys want to take a station break, you can. But if you call me Chris Everett to my face one more time...
I already did it twice.
You call it one more time, we better take a station break.
Well, it's a 5-minute segment, or 5-segment show. We got a long way to go.
Well, we do.
We got a long way to go.
We do.
I'll get a couple segments out of you
before.
before.
It's good to be here with you, though.
Well, it's good to see you, too.
Because you've been talking like this behind my back for a long time.
But now I said it right here.
Right, exactly.
Well, we got no problems
then. I think that you probably won't say it again.
I bet I do.
Okay.
Chris?
Although it doesn't quite work without Jim Rome's face when he finally realizes that Jim Everett is about to hit him. But they're two leading passers all time yardage wise are Jim Everett and Mark Bulger, and then fourth is Goff already. Now I'm not making a serious case for Bulger or Goff. You could make a case for Everett, but I think I agree with you that it ought to be Waterfield instead of Everett.
Yeah, Hall of Fame, won titles with the team in two different cities, Cleveland and LA. It's interesting how Van Brocklin started his career in LA as part of a quarterback controversy with another Hall of Famer in Waterfield, and then ended, even though there was no real controversy in Philly, Van Brocklin was the clear starter, but being backed up by another Hall of Famer in Sonny Jurgensen. That Van Brocklin Waterfield is often considered the first real quarterback controversy in NFL history. a guy who was like one of the first Hollywood stars in professional sports. And you got to realize that in 1950 or whenever it was, I think 46 was when the Rams first went out to LA. This was still 10 years from the Lakers, 10 years from the Dodgers. So those LA Ram teams were the first LA sports team that kind of took California by storm, and Waterfield was a big part of that.
Let's finish up with the San Francisco 49ers. I think there's no debate about the first two, and Steve Young and Joe Montana, not in that order. Montana and then Young are 1 and 2.
Absolutely.
And then I have Y.A. Tittle again and John Brody.
Me too. Tittle, who was the quarterback for the Niners in the 50s before going to the Giants to finish out his career, and then Brody, who was their quarterback in the 70s. And those 70s Niners teams never made a Super Bowl, but they were a pretty good team, especially in the early 70s. I think they lost to Dallas in the playoffs like 3 years in a row.
It was something. They lost to them a couple of NFC championship games in a row. So I want to say 70 and 71, they lost to them in the NFC championship game.
Yes.
And then maybe, let me look up. There might have been one other like really good team that they had. Let me just pull up their franchise index. Franchise pages. Team years.
Brody was the NFL MVP in 1970, which was one of the years that they went to and lost the conference championship game.
Yeah, 72, they lost to Dallas in the divisional playoffs, 30-28. And then obviously Dallas would have lost to Washington the next week because Dallas didn't go to the Super Bowl that year. So, yeah, they lost to those the Doomsday Cowboys teams 3 times in a row.
Close losses, too. 14-3 in 1971 and then 17-10 in 1970. So 3 years, and the biggest loss was 11 points.
You know what I didn't realize? I was reading this about Candlestick Park the other day. I'm so used to seeing Candlestick Park when it opened and then from 81 on that I didn't realize for the whole 1970s Candlestick Park was AstroTurf.
I didn't either.
It's weird to think of that because but it was. So during the beginning of that era, that's why I brought it up. But I did not know that, but it was. So in this division, it's got to
just real quick on the Niners. I guess there really wasn't anywhere else you really could have gone.
No, Jeff Garcia had some nice years. Alex Smith had some nice years. Colin Kaepernick had some nice years, but not to the level where you'd be seriously talking about them instead of, who's fourth on this list? Brody?
Yeah, probably. Probably Brody. Yeah.
Yeah, so no, you can't. You can't make a case really for anybody else. Garcia maybe just because of his numbers, but that's when you adjusted it all for the era, it doesn't hold up. But Garcia had a nice career.
So our 49ers, Joe Montana, Steve Young, John Brody, and Y.A. Tittle.
This has to be the first time we have a guy, or no, because did we end up with Jurgensen? Because we have Warner's on 2 teams in this division.
Warner is on 2 teams in this division. Yeah, absolutely.
Jurgensen was as well. So
in the East, yeah. So this is,
No, it's San Francisco. Are you between San Francisco and the Rams?
I'm not between San Francisco and the Rams. I was about to say this is closer than you might think, but I actually think it's not closer than you might think. Now, there are 3 Hall of Famers on each side. Montana is basically, you can say, Montana's a Hall of Famer if he never wears a Kansas City Chief uniform. Tittle, I guess his Giants career helps him a little bit, but Montana and Young, pretty much their entire Hall of Fame career was with the Niners, and then Tittle a decent amount. With the Rams, at least 2 of them, Warner and Van Brocklin, did a significant amount elsewhere, and Montana is probably the 2nd best quarterback of all time. He's at worst the 3rd best quarterback of all time, and Young's in the top, 12 maybe, and you can't say that about Van Brocklin, Warner, or Waterfield in my estimation. So I think it's San Francisco pretty clearly.
So what that leaves us with is Dallas, Green Bay, Atlanta, and San Francisco.
Let me just read the rosters real quick just to remind everybody. Dallas is Troy Aikman, Roger Staubach, Tony Romo, and Don Meredith. Green Bay is Bart Starr, Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers, and Arnie Herber. San Francisco, Joe Montana, Steve Young, John Brody, Y.A. Tittle. Atlanta, Michael Vick, Matt Ryan, Steve Bartkowski, and Chris Chandler.
So one of these things is not like the other. So
Atlanta falls pretty quick here, I think.
Knock Atlanta off the list. So we're now down to Green Bay, San Francisco, and Dallas. And to be honest, it's strong. Like, I'm looking at when the AFC, when we did it, we had New England, who kind of went off pretty quickly. That was just there mostly on the strength of Brady. Cleveland was mostly there on the strength of Otto Graham. Kansas City had some good, with Mahomes still in his career. But, like, these three are all kind of loaded. I'm trying to think of who I would knock off next.
It's got to be Dallas.
Yeah, because there's no trend. I mean, Staubach and Aikman are Hall of Famers. They're not gods in the football.
Yeah.
Like a few guys on this list is. So Dallas would get knocked off next. You'd be down to San Francisco and Green Bay. And to me, it has to be Green Bay. Would you say Rodgers and Montana are a push? Or would you give Montana a slight edge because of the more winning?
I would give Montana an edge because of more winning.
Okay. So
I would, but I would say that both Favre and Starr are probably at least as good as Steve Young in totality. Bart Starr's numbers obviously don't compare to Young's, but I think that you probably
2, 3, and 4 are Packers. Even if you make Montana 1, 2, 3, and 4 are Packers.
At the very least, probably. Young might slip in there, but yeah. 3 of the next 4 are Packers, definitely. And then
Arnie Herber is tough here. We put him in here. It's tough to compare him, but
he's a Hall of Famer and Brody isn't. He won a lot. Neither Brody or Tittle did.
It's got to be Green Bay, doesn't it?
I think it has to be Green Bay. So now we are in the Super Bowl, and much like Super Bowl 5 and Super Bowl 9 and 10 and 13 and 14, these are all this is a matchup between 2 former NFL teams.
Yes.
Those being the Colts and the 49ers.
Well,
the Colts and the Packers.
The only one of those you can. No, they were all in the NFL when they played in the Super Bowl.
You know what I'm saying. It's about how right after the merger happened in 70, like the next 6 Super Bowls or whatever, more than half the time the AFC representative was a former NFL team, whether it was the Colts or the Steelers.
Let's just run this down. Baltimore/Indianapolis is Peyton Manning, Johnny Unitas, Burt Jones, and Andrew Luck. And then Green Bay is Aaron Rodgers, Brett Favre, Bart Starr, and Arnie Herber. Who on that list is number 1? Manning?
I'd actually put Manning. I'd put Manning 3rd.
What?
I would put Manning 3rd. I would go Montana and then Unitas.
Where are you getting Joe Montana from?
Yeah, God, it's been a long week.
You're right. Never played for the Packers.
I was thinking the 49ers. I'm sorry. You're right. I would put Unitas over Manning.
Okay, but they're both Colts.
Yeah, agreed.
So you have Colts 1 and 2.
Yeah, but then I think I would probably have Packers 3, 4, 5, and 6.
Oh, man, it just gets so tough with Arnie Herber against Burt Jones and Andrew Luck. So if you had Indianapolis 1 and 2, how close would you have Aaron Rodgers to Peyton Manning?
Close. Manning gets the edge, but close.
And then Favre and Starr. Even let's take the guy from the third. Let's take Arnie out for a second. Burt Jones and Andrew Luck are nowhere near Brett Favre and Bart Starr.
And I know that this is only one measure, but I'm counting up in my head. And 4 of these come from Arnie Herber, but still. 11 championships for the Packers guys, and Unitas and Peyton Manning with the Colts have 4.
So we're leaning towards we're going with the Packers, I would think, right?
I think it's hard to say a team with 4 Hall of Famers from 4 different eras loses out, especially when you factor in that Burt Jones is not close to a Hall of Famer. And I've never heard anybody say about Burt Jones that it was like, oh, well, he could have been great. I think Burt Jones...
We've never listened to Ernie Accorsi speak. That used to be a thing on the Giants fan site, Big Blue Winter. Anytime Ernie Accorsi would give a press conference, people would be like, how long before he mentions Burt Jones? But...
All right. Well, Ernie Accorsi aside, I guess you could say, well, Luck, had some, no pun intended, bad luck. But I think that if you're just talking about what their careers were, Luck and Jones are probably the bottom 2.
Now, let me ask you this. So we're going with Green Bay, right?
I think we are.
I know this isn't the debate, and I know we're pushing the 2-hour mark already. If it was between Indianapolis, or if it was between the Colts and San Francisco for second, where would you go there?
I'd probably still go San Francisco.
I think I would as well.
I think Burt Jones is a real weak link in these 4s.
You.
I'm sorry?
He speaks highly of you.
Yeah, I just, no disrespect to Burt Jones, but I think he drags the Colts down. And I guess to a certain extent, Luck does too, but Burt Jones, I think, drags it down a little bit. So.
All right. So Packers win, 49ers would get the silver medal, and then the Colts would get the bronze.
Yeah, I don't think there's anybody else in the NFC that I would necessarily give it to.
Over the Cowboys just because of the top 2, so.
Yeah, that's true. That is 2 of the best 10 quarterbacks of all time. And I think other than San Francisco, nobody else has that. So, and San Francisco might not even have it. Yeah. If it was top 2, it would definitely be the Colts.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they're better than Staubach and Aikman. They're better than Rodgers and Favre. They're better than the only one they'd be close to would be Montana and Young, probably. So. All right. Well, we hope you enjoyed this 2-week-long examination, dive, whatever you want to call it, into the greatest quarterbacks for each of the 32 franchises in NFL history. Something a little bit different. We've done a lot of sort of straight storytelling, and then the in memoriam. So we thought a little bit more of a back and forth would be fun for a couple of episodes. Andrew, do you have anything to add before we wrap things up?
No, I really enjoyed this. And there's no right answers. It's all just about kind of having fun with it. I like where we landed, but that's not to say if we did it 2 weeks from now, we wouldn't have different answers. So, yeah, I think, and again, if anybody thinks we're way off on something, or we totally forgot about somebody or anything like that, let us know. And the Facebook thing, it's not like the topic is closed forever and we'll never discuss it ever again. So.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us as always. Until next time, I'm Dan Neumann.
And I'm Andrew Neumann. Goodbye, old sports.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
We here at the Sports History Network proudly partner with 26 podcasts, all revolving around the history of sports. But did you know that many of our hosts were sports history authors way before they started their shows? It's true. We've got Joe Ziemba, host of When Football Was Football, Joe Zagurski, host of Pro Football in the 1970s, Mark Morthier, host of Yesterday Sports, Tommy Phillips, host of Lombardi Memories, and Scott Adamson, co-host of From the 55-Yard Line. All these authors have many books for you to choose from. To check them out, go to our website at sportshistorynetwork.com/sportshistorybooks. Pick up your copy today. Soundtrack provided by Kevin MacLeod of filmmusic.io.